The United States Supreme Court ruled that the immigrant who was sent down to the El Salvador mega prison needs to be returned. And this decision was 9-0. There were actually no recorded dissents, so I'm assuming 9-0, which means Sotomayor and Clarence Thomas agreed on something, which definitely made me stop and think, what happened? You know that something went wrong when those two agree with each other? That would be like saying, President Trump and Nancy Pelosi having lunch together. So when I first heard of this opinion, it came out, the order, the unsigned order, I thought, oh, okay, Roberts, Barrett, which one of them went with the liberals? And then when it was unanimous, no recorded dissents, I thought, oh, I think somebody may have screwed up somewhere. So we should take a look at this. Here's a little bit of background. The Supreme Court on Thursday upheld the lower court's decision to facilitate the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a Salvadoran national living in Maryland, from an El Salvador prison. Garcia, he's 29, was deported to the El Salvadoran mega prison last month for being an alleged member of the MS-13 gang, but his attorneys and he both maintain that no, he's not a member of MS-13. Now, I actually did some research and I couldn't see that he was charged with or convicted of a crime. So, and we're going to talk a little bit later about where this association comes in with him allegedly being part of this gang. But I did see several sources say that he's not been charged with or convicted of a crime that would be associated with this gang activity. So, but he did come into the country illegally, and I think that's in a later slide. I like to jump ahead so that then when we see the slide, I feel stupid because I've already said that part. So it does look like this was a mistake where he was sent out of the country as part of these alleged gang members, and he shouldn't have been. But, maybe we should just look at the silver lining, and we could use this as kind of a little marketing thing for people who are thinking about coming into the country illegally. So if they just played this story on loop down by the Rio Grande, hey, this guy was here illegally, and now he's in the El Salvadoran mega prison. So that could be you. I bet you that people would just start turning around and saying, I don't want to go there illegally. That could happen. So just saying, it's already happened. Maybe we should just try to get some positive benefits out of it. He entered the United States illegally in 2011, and he traveled to Maryland where his older brother, a U.S. citizen, lived. He did have a work permit since 2019, and he was stopped and detained by ICE officers in March of 2019, and that's when he was questioned about his alleged gang affiliation with MS-13. In 2019, just a few months later, an immigration judge concluded that it was enough that a past, proven, and reliable source of information had verified Garcia's gang membership, rank, and gang name. Now, I don't know what they really mean by reliable source, because sometimes a reliable source is ironclad. Other times a reliable source is your neighbor who's ticked off because you keep parking in his favorite parking spot. So I don't know what kind of reliable source this was, and the articles that I read, I really couldn't tell how rock solid it was. But several months later, Abrego Garcia was eventually granted withholding of removal, a form of immigration relief that protects him from being deported to El Salvador. And I believe that withholding of removal was granted because he allegedly was fearing for being harmed if he were to go back to El Salvador, which is why they said, okay, you're going to get this withholding order. He can't be removed. It does seem to be a little strange to me that at one point a judge is saying, yes, he is a member of the gang. I can conclude that from this reliable source. And then a few months later, they're granting him protection from a gang or the gang. So I'm not sure in 2019, I think the government's position was, yes, he's definitely a gang member, unless he's not. I don't know, it just seems a little confusing to me. unless there's some kind of, from the movies, if there's some kind of witness protection, somebody testifies and then they put them in witness protection, maybe that. But I didn't see anything like that in the stories that I was reading about this. All I could see was that, this judge had concluded based on this one source that he was a member of the gang, and then a few months later they're providing this protection. So I don't really know what was going on. And he was deported on March 15, 2025 on one of the high-profile deportation flights to El Salvador that also included alleged Venezuelan gang members. Can you imagine being on that flight? Think of it like Spirit Airlines, only more chains and fewer bathroom breaks. In case of an emergency, your handcuffs are going to be a problem. So what did the district judge actually order before the Supreme Court decision happened? The U.S. District Judge Paula Zenas ordered federal officials to coordinate his return back to Maryland in a Monday order, calling his deportation wholly unlawful. And then on Thursday, the Supreme Court sided with Zenas. Zenas. That sounds kind of like a prescription medication where one of the side effects is explosive diarrhea. That makes me think of the show Xena, Warrior Princess. Do you guys remember that? I wonder if this Judge Paula Zenas ever kind of thought she was like Xena, Warrior Princess. Probably not. The order states, the United States acknowledges that Abrego Garcia was subject to a withholding order forbidding his removal to El Salvador, and that the removal to El Salvador was therefore illegal. So that was the withholding order that I mentioned earlier above, where it was just a few months after the immigration judge had said, yeah, there's this source that says you're a member. That thing that happened a few months later, that is what they're referring to where, okay, he shouldn't have been removed because of that order. The High Court further said it properly requires the government to facilitate Abrego Garcia's release from custody in El Salvador and to ensure that his case is handled as it would have been had he not been improperly sent to El Salvador. So I think the Supreme Court used the word facilitate because they really didn't want to get into all the details. They're like, don't tell us how you get him back, just get him back. I do think that this part of the opinion was a message from the Supreme Court to all district court judges, because I think they worded this in a way to where they were trying to tell other judges out there, hey, the executive branch is the branch, and that's not you, so stop acting like that. Let's look at what they said here. However, the court said that the additional requirement to effectuate his return, so this is the Supreme Court talking about the district court's order. However, the court said that the additional requirement to effectuate his return was unclear and may exceed the judge's authority. The justices directed Zenas to clarify the directive with due regard for the deference owed to the executive branch in the conduct of foreign affairs. So, thank you. I think the Supreme Court was trying to say something to send a message to all of these judges that, look, you've got to give deference to the executive branch, to the President of the United States with foreign affairs. So they were saying, look, Judge Zenas, yes, that deportation was wrong, but stop acting like you get to start flying on Air Force One. I wish they would have put a footnote by that in the order, that if you just looked at the footnote under this due regard to the deference to the executive branch, a little footnote that says, we're talking to you, Judge Boasberg. They should have just listed all of the judges' names, all these rogue activist judges that have been acting like they're the president. But anyway, I hope they start doing more of this where they try to give them some clear direction that you need to stay in your lane. The Supreme Court did give the Trump administration some direction. They said the administration, meanwhile, should be prepared to share what it can concerning the steps it has taken and the prospect of further steps the court directed. Again, this was an unsigned order, so there were no written dissents, so I'm assuming it was 9-0. So I think there was a mistake made, and I think, I don't remember from the article, but it seems like we did have either someone in the Justice Department or part of Homeland Security. Somebody, I think, said, yeah, there was a mistake made when this happened. But hopefully that process has been tightened up so that things like this, we won't have this happen again, just because we did make it so MSNBC was actually right about something, which is pretty rare. You know, I get confused when I see MSNBC say something that actually is correct. So let's just try not to let that happen again. Okay, hey, thank you for watching. Thank you for watching my headline videos and my YouTube shorts. Have a fantastic weekend, and we'll see you next week.